This is Art 490, Baroque art history, and this video is going to focus on the art of Flanders in the Baroque period. This map is a map of the Low Countries in the 1600s, the area, the time we're talking about. The Spanish Netherlands here would be all of this territory, and it was part of the Spanish Empire, including Spain, the Netherlands here, and other places in the world. In fact, Naples was also part of it, and Sicily. Right now, this area would be Belgium, and this area would be the Netherlands up here. We're going to be focusing in this area here, where Flanders, and Ghent here is you remember the Ghent altarpiece by Jan van Eyck. Jan van Eyck was from this area, and also the other Flemish painters that we saw in the Northern Renaissance. But now in the Baroque period, we're going to be looking at Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens was an artist that he lived a long time and had made a large body of work. Over 1,400 paintings are attributed to him. He had a large workshop, and he just cranked out large pictures throughout his life. He was famous in his lifetime. In addition to being an artist, he was also a diplomat. Different members of European royalty would send him on diplomatic missions or ambassadorial missions to different parts of the world, in Europe, to do diplomatic missions or spying kind of missions, in addition to looking at art. So he had these opportunities to travel and to study art, and he, in addition to just studying them, he would make copies for his patrons of paintings. So he was very familiar with, say, the art of Italy. The Venetians, he would, Tintoretto and Paolo Veronese. He would know those pictures very well. He went to Rome and Florence. He knew Michelangelo's work. He made, you can see Michelangelo stuff in his figures all the time. And also Caravaggio and the Carraccis, the Farnese ceiling, the kind of Baroque in Italy that we saw in our Italian Baroque artists. The two themes there, with the Caravaggio theme and the Carracci theme, both of those are evident in Rubens' work. In addition to the Flemish work that would be characteristic of his own birthplace, the kind of art like Jan van Eyck and all those other artists who lived in that area and made works that were, hyper realistic in terms of the surface details of materials. So all of the main features of art that we've seen up to now are all sort of blended together in Rubens. And we'll when we look at them, we'll point out which come from where. Here in this portrait, one of his early works, this is him with his new bride, and he's, it's a self-portrait, kind of reminiscent of the portrait by Jan van Eyck, the Arnolfini portrait, in that it has, it's hyper realistic. I mean, if you're looking at the detail of things like the materials, this gold detail on the fabric, all the materials, the lace, the kind of shininess of this garment, the lace here. They're really big on lace in the 1600s. All of these things are things to show off his, sort of like the legacy of his homeland is that they were very interested in surface details and materials. Well, that's one of his ingredients. But in addition to that, it has the tenebrism of Caravaggio, that darkness in the background, with the figures emerging from that darkness with kind of a spotlight, like a theatrical spotlight on them. But it's not nearly as harsh as, say, a Caravaggio would be. It's lighter and more fun, I guess you could say. And that aspect of it, the color, the painterly aspect of it, the fact that everything is not polished and smoothed, so you can still see some brush strokes and the bright colors and things. All of these are Venetian features. And in addition to that, look at this leg. Look at the muscularity of that leg and that arm, the volume of it. This is Michelangelo features. So he's gotten everything from all the different places mixed into one picture. And as we'll see, the mixture of things aren't all the same. Sometimes there's more of one and more of another. This one isn't particularly dynamic the way, say, a Caravaggio would be. There's not a lot of movement. But when you think of the way she's sitting, it's there's no movement at all. It's just the swirl of her drapery creates some little bit of movement. But the way he's sitting, his hips are probably facing to the left, and his shoulders are sort of twisted over to the right here to face us, and then his legs are crossed with one over here and one over here. That's a kind of a dynamic pose, just for someone sitting, and it's similar to the sort of poses that are in Michelangelo's Sistine ceiling, the Ignudi and the Prophets. They all have they're large muscular figures who are sitting in such a way as to have a twist or something other than just a static pose. So he has that as an ingredient, but Michelangelo would never have put all of this silk and surface texture and bright colors and minute details and things. So none of the other artists who have any of these characteristics would have made something like this. It took Rubens and his sort of eclectic mixture of influences, and he was just uniquely poised to do that because of his travels. He was an art. He could have stayed in Flanders and painted just there, and looked just like any other Flemish artist. But because he traveled around and was able to absorb everything from all the current art that was being made in Italy, and the art of the Mannerists in Venice, and the art of the Northern Renaissance artists, he was um, um, and also I guess he himself has his own particular style that he mixes all these together with, which is makes it much more interesting than if he had just been a regular Flemish artist. Here's an altarpiece that he did. It's called the Raising of the Cross. This is what it looks like in place. It's kind of it's a triptych on, I think it's on a wooden panel. So you have one big picture in the middle, and then there's doors on either side that close, and you have the cross, Christ on the cross, and he's being lifted up. This is what it looks like, with its frame. But here's a sort of a composite, so you can see what all the things look like more clearly. First of all, the raising of the cross. That is instead of being a crucifixion, which is the way the Italian Renaissance, especially the High Renaissance, would depict a crucifixion where Christ is on the cross already and he's already up, and usually in the center. Here, look at for example, this is Tintoretto, an example where you have Christ is on the cross, he's right in the center. Is kind of this is High Renaissance, except that it's a little later than High Renaissance, so into the Mannerist period, where it has extra things going on, because it's Venetian and they like the pageantry and filling things with stuff. It has that in it, but this kind of composition where it's perfectly symmetrical and Christ is already up, and there's a little bit of dynamism going on with other things happening around, but they're all happening around a central core of stability. In the Baroque, everything is on the move. Everything is action and tension, and just choosing the moment where they're raising the cross rather than the cross is already up is a Baroque thing. In addition, remember when we talked about the Italian Baroque. because of the Council of Trent and the desire to sort of make it as art more accessible to the common people, make it look like you can identify with what's going on. So what we see is that the cross, in addition to being, it's not raised yet, it's not down and it's not up, it's in the process of being raised, but it's diagonal in the composition. Baroque artists like diagonals a lot, but it's also it's coming towards us. When the cross is put down, it's going to be put down sort of out of the picture into our space, and when it's raised, it will be in our space. So things are moving in a direction towards us, and that, including us in the picture, is part of many many Baroque paintings, as we saw with Caravaggio, where there's something in the painting that sort of makes you feel as though you're part of the painting's world. And of course, it's also a part of the ceiling paintings that we saw several instances of, where the space in the painting is part of your space. It's just a sky above your head, and so that ingredient included, with the Baroque ingredient of dynamism and lots of things moving, plus you have a large number, a large cast of characters all moving, is a Venetian thing. Go and look back at the Venetian example of a raising of a cross here, but this is Christ on the cross is in the middle, but this is one of the thieves on the other side. The thief that has not yet been raised is on the ground over here. But the people are struggling to make stuff happen, and in contrast to this composition, which is these Venetian paintings, as we saw with the, let's say, Paolo Veneziano, was large pictures with with cast of hundreds of characters. That's typical of Venetian things, but here we're closer into the action. There's not quite as many pictures, but the painting is filled with the figures that are there, and they're all dynamic and moving and have realistic characteristics. This is I guess this would be Mary Magdalene here, and this is Mary. I don't know who the other figures are, but there's probably John. I guess this is Mary here and John. And there's a soldier on a horse here, and the other thief that is being nailed to the cross. And I guess this is the thief that's going to be nailed later to the cross. But look, we're seeing him in a radical foreshortening, and then you got the horse hooves going here. I mean, it's reminiscent of this kind of thing from Caravaggio. It's also reminiscent of this kind of thing. These are things that are dynamic, and they have the tenebrism, they have the realistic figures. But this is Italian. Caravaggio, his works look rather stark in comparison to the Rubens or anything else like you don't mistake this for Venetian. I mean, everything is austere. All the colors are subdued, and we're focusing on just a few bits of action, and it's not that dynamic. I mean, it's more dynamic than, say, a Italian High Renaissance painting. But when you compare it to a Rubens, it's all about the flesh, the muscles, the movement, the dynamism, the action. And there's everybody is expressing emotion in every face. Another thing is different from the Caravaggio is that the faces and the figures are all idealized. It's Christ on the cross, but look at his figure. I mean, it's like a Michelangelo muscular figure, and in this muscular figure down here, the everything is bulging and straining. And this kind of pose is sort of a contrapposto pose. This little gentle twist here, and that looking up to heaven. All these are idealized things, which are not Caravaggio characteristics. but they are characteristics of the Carracci. If you think of the Carracci ceiling painting, like the Farnese Gallery and all those figures and the movement and things that are going on in them, uh, this is more reminiscent of that. Um, so you could pick out, this characteristic. Say, this figure kind of looks like something that would be in a Carracci ceiling. Uh, but the idea of having this figure like on the ground, and horses moving around him, and the darkness in the background back here, um, are Caravaggio characteristics. And then having a suit of armor here with lots of shininess and lots of detail, so that you can see exactly this material. That's a that's a Northern Renaissance sort of thing, or a Flemish characteristic. And then having a dog here. Well, Paolo Veronese had a dog in his uh, Last Supper. So I mean, just sticking a dog in there for no reason, just because it's an opportunity to put another texture and another dynamic figure. Look at these legs. These look like Michelangelo legs. All the seen from different angles, all straining, all bulging. Um, you see things from other artists mixed together in some uh, new way that none of those other artists would ever have done. There's a classical idealized face for John there. Um, you know, when I think of this, it's not a like say if characteristics of Caravaggio. He took some characteristics of Caravaggio, but not all of them. Like Caravaggio has he would take image he'd take real people and represent them exactly as they look. And so you think of that the reality of his works, has the kind of photographic look that his has, and this doesn't have that. I mean, these are all these faces and all these actions are all idealized versions of those actions, and so that puts it more in the Carracci camp, or more the Italian, the Venetian Italians. All right, let's look at another work by Rubens. This is one of a series uh, of it's Marie de Medici, uh, the woman in this picture here. There's Marie. This it's a series of pictures. I think there's maybe 24 of them or so, and they're all meant for a room in the palace. Marie de Medici was the wife of let's see, the Henry VI, and she had commissioned from Rubens all these pictures to show her life, and they're all have that sort of dynamic Rubens color grandiosity in them. And we're just going to be looking at one of them, just this one here, as an example of them. But you can see as they go along, they all have the same sort of color scheme of just wild colors, and lots of fleshy figures moving all over the place, uh, and just exuberance and pageantry and uh, dynamism going on all, everywhere. So they're all, lusciously Baroque. What the series is for is is to sort of commemorate her life, and uh, she was a queen at a time when monarchs had absolute power, and they were the idea of divine right of kings, that they were special people, that not they didn't exist in reality. They were almost like storybook people, and so that their lives were more ornamental than actual. And when she asked Rubens to paint a picture of her life story, as it were. Um, he had to make up a whole bunch of stuff to make her life more interesting. So he put together a kind of a series of things with allegories and mythology and things that raise her life into a fable, uh, to a magical sort of fable, as if the gods are all involved with everything that she ever did. In this instance, what we're looking at is here's Henry, her future husband. When he first sees her painting, a painting of her face, he's like for whatever reason, she wasn't there when they met. He saw her and fell in love with her picture. So I think it's one of those things that they used to do, because there was only a small number of people that you could have as a mate if you're in the member of royalty in Europe, and they would take pictures and send them about, and as a kind of a way to find out who can marry who. And I think instead of Marie going to France I think she was Italian, instead of going to France to see if they would fall in love with each other, she just sent a picture, and apparently the picture did the trick. But it's not just Henry and the picture. It's Henry standing in this very theatrical pose, like he's walking out in the lands of France. He has the personification of France here, who is leaning in, sort of whispering to him, uh, you know, telling her opinion of this, because this is the whole country of France behind him. Cupid is here, and of course Cupid is the one who shoots the arrows, and I guess there's a Nike figure holding up the picture, floating in the sky. So it's a supernatural occurrence, of course, the world that these royals live in. And then up in the clouds is Zeus with Juno, or his wife. I guess it would be Jupiter and Juno, um, or Zeus and Hera. And Zeus has his eagle over here, and uh, Juno has her peacocks here, and they're looking down approvingly from their uh, divine point of view, looking down at this mating between Henry and Marie de Medici. And so I don't know. This is as far from reality as we can get, but because the Queen commissioned this, um, we're in a different kind of world where fanciful things are being done. So when you think of the gritty realism of Caravaggio, that isn't a source for something like this. This has to be done in the kind of world like, say, the Venetians would have, where it's all dolled up with color and allegory and mythology, and we're pretending that something that never actually happened, so as to create uh, uh, a mythological story. Uh, it's got all of the dynamism. If you start following lines around, they just swirl around everywhere. It's very, very chaotic. Bright colors. It's like eye candy. It's just something to delight the senses. You look at things and it's just pretty. Silk fabrics, flesh, peacock feathers. Uh, you know, nothing is straight on. Nothing is normal. Everything has to have a twist and a turn, and moving in space. Very dynamic and theatrical. Just look at this gesture. This little hand sticking out here, and the lighting on it, and this theatrical gesture of France coming up behind and putting her hand on his shoulder, as if to whisper approvingly of uh, his choice of queen. And then a couple of cupids are playing with his armor here, which apparently he's taken off because he's so in love. He's no longer interested in making war. So that's the world that Rubens lived in, with having to satisfy the desires of this queen, to you know aggrandize herself with all of these stories. There she is with all her stuff. It happened that he was also going to do a series like this for her husband Henry, who died before her, and this is a study for that. He never did get to the Henry pictures, but he did make uh, a modello, which is a study painting which is interesting to look at for the purpose of understanding how these things are made. I mean, when you look at this and you think, this would take a whole lifetime to paint. If there's 24 of these things, it's just so much acreage of canvas you got to cover. Well, the way he worked, he had a big studio with lots of helpers, and his job was to design the picture, first to draw a picture, and then to paint a model of it at a smaller scale. And then he would give this model to his studio, and then they would put it on the canvas, increase its scale to canvas size, and then he could come back and paint, the more important bits. But in addition to just regular assistants, he also had specialists, like people in his studio who he paid, who just happened to be very, very good at a particular thing. Like, for example, animals. He would have an animal specialist when he had horses here, or say uh, the eagle or the peacock. They had a specialist for that. There was a specialist landscape painter or a specialist in flowers or drapery. I mean, he would get a team together, and they would get all the paint on the canvas, and then he could come back and put his hand to it, make it a little more special. And so he was able to get all these things done. But just look, when he's painting a painting, how great he is at it. His ability to just manipulate paint and create these things. It looks much better to me, at least, and in the sketchy quality of this, because you can see it has life to it. It has some drawing going on. It has some pentimenti. It has some places where paint is opaque in some place, and then it goes into transparent in other places. Uh, these sorts of things are like this line around the horse. Give it a lot more life. Uh, I don't know how you do this. This is an incredible bit of painting to make this. I guess that this would be one that was never made into one of the big ones. But I expect that when you look at the way the studio works, what comes out at the end, it's much more polished and doesn't really have as much of the life as the study has. Let's look at another one. It's called Prometheus Bound. It's a mythological story with Prometheus as a titan in his conflict with Zeus, and Zeus punishes him for stealing fire, and there's the fire down here, and giving it to mortals, and his punishment was to be chained up to a rock. There's the chain, there's the rock, and to be attacked by an eagle every day and have his liver eaten out, and he'd grow back and he would get attacked the next day. So here's an eagle, giant, wonderfully rendered eagle, and this was done by one of his assistants, or actually, someone who was a painter in his own right, who was a specialist in animals, and I guess he subcontracted the eagle for that. Nice, nice image of an eagle, and it's when you look at this whole picture, it's just it's got Caravaggio written all over it. I mean, look at this, and you look you look at this, this looks like the source of this kind of figure for that kind of composition, where you have a figure lying upside down in this sort of diagonal, dramatic pose and movemented pose. But then you look at further back as sources. Here's Michelangelo's Last Judgment. It's filled with figures in the same sort of thing, that struggle, like this kind of figure here, or this one here. All big muscular figures that are in contorted poses, uh, like this one here, are very reminiscent of this. So Rubens had, cataloged in his experiences, art from lots of different places to put together images like this. And this is just Baroque all over. I mean, when you look at this picture, the composition of this picture and the composition of the cross, it's the same sort of thing. You've got a diagonal movement sort of coming into your space, uh, with all this struggle and might and bulgy muscles. Uh, just that's this is Rubens, and this is just I guess the greatest expression of that, uh, of the things we think of as the Baroque, the theatrical drama and uh, uh, you know strong contrasts of light and dark, uh, theatrical lighting, and emotion and figures struggling and moving in the picture, and all sorts of stuff going on, in addition to lots and lots of surface detail, textures like the feathers, uh, the cloth here. Everything is made so that whenever he has an object of a material, he wants that material to look just right. Notice how he's made the chains rather small in relation to the figure, so it looked like he could pull himself off if he wanted to, given that he looks so strong. But having the composition such that his head is down at the bottom and he's sort of diagonally moving towards us, and he's foreshortened. All that is Baroque. Here's another example with Daniel in the lion's den. And again, in this case, it doesn't have as much movement in the same sense of there's not anything struggling. But look at this. This is Daniel seated. Look at how he's seated. It's all clenched together with uh, his legs and his hands in this position, his eyes looking up here. There's probably one like this figure from Michelangelo. Yet is not rendered like a Michelangelo. The blending of tones within the leg are more like a Venetian artist, especially having this bright red over here, and all this texture of all the lions are all very, very Venetian, and then the tenebrism of it is all very Caravaggio. And even Caravaggio would have real super detailed things like like a skull or something, uh, but but the fact that it's idealized is not a Caravaggio thing. So, um, if you look at these pictures and you become aware of all the different styles that are made into it, understand that it's Rubens is the one that is bringing together lots of things, and that the artist that he's bringing them from, those artists would not have done a lot of the other things that this has, like Michelangelo's. It's only this pose that he got from Michelangelo, but the way the surface is rendered is is Rubens, and also the face. It's a Rubens sort of face rather than a Michelangelo face or any other artist. It's his particular, type of face. All right, one of his assistants who became an independent artist, his name is Van Dyke. Well, he's next. Van Dyke, worked closely with Rubens for years and years, and was one of his. I guess he began as an apprentice and then became a collaborator, and then became an independent artist on his own. And for a long time, he made any number of paintings in the style of Rubens, except his are a little more elegant. Rubens I think of as often over the top and excessive, whereas Van Dyke's um, are more subdued, a little more elegant. But he later becomes uh, the the court painter for the English monarch. We will see in a minute, but I just want to show his self portrait. Uh, his his mustache and beard here. That's called a Van Dyke after him. We still call that configuration of Van Dyke. But look how he paints himself. Um, he's not just standing there looking at you like you would expect a portrait to be. If you think of all the Rembrandt self-portraits or Van Gogh self-portraits, where he's just looking at his face and studying his face. No, he's he's facing away from us, and with his body turning away from us, but his head turned back towards us, and he's got this chain in his hand, and he's pointing at a great big sunflower. I mean, this is just it's just peculiar, but that's the Baroque thing about it. It has to have movement. There has to be something going on, and it looks like there's more to it than simply uh, making a picture of himself. Here's another one. I mean, we look at this, you say, is this a Baroque picture or is it a Renaissance picture? Well, how would a Renaissance artist portray himself? I mean, uh, this stance, this arm akimbo, he's leaning up against something. His head's tilted down. He's looking straight at you, and there's just some sort of uh, wildness about him. He's like an actor, performing rather than uh, a timeless, say, symmetrical pose that you might have in the Renaissance. So it's good to get an eye for, you see enough of Baroque paintings and you compare them to Renaissance paintings and you get an eye for what period you're in. And this is unmistakable in that it's a Baroque picture. So Van Dyck uh, did this painting of Charles I of England. Charles I was a patron of the arts. He loved to spend money on art and artists, and he tried to get Van Dyck for years and years before finally Van Dyck came to England and lived and became exclusively a court painter. There's not very many court painters. Van Dyck was one. Rubens was a court painter. That Marie de Medici was, but I don't think he was official. Uh, Velasquez was a court painter. It was a difficult gig to get, and you had to have a monarch who was especially good had a good eye and understood quality in order to have one that becomes a memorable court painter. Anyway, Charles I was a short man, and he was about 5 feet tall. But he was a king, and he wanted to be portrayed as a king. And here he is. He's portrayed in many ways. I mean, he's wearing his kingly armor in some places. He's riding a horse in other places. But the one that we're looking at is a special one by Van Dyck is this one. It's called Charles I. I think he's on the hunt. He's a hunting picture, where he's been riding his horse. He gets off, and he stands to look out over the countryside, which is England, um, to just view it, like he's royal, and he's standing there with this nonchalance and uh, his regalness, and he's just casually looking at us and peering at us the way a king might. Uh, and the artist has done everything in his powers to make him look as powerful and elegant and uh, just as good as he can possibly look. He's got him. Just look at his pose. His arm is akimbo. Here, like this one. Here's an arm akimbo. When your arm like that is very nonchalant. He's holding his gloves in his hand. Let's zoom in a little. He's got his sword with him. Nice rapier looking thing. He's leaning on a walking stick. He doesn't need it, but he's out in the country. He's sort of like uh, uh, like a lord of a manor, looking out over his field. Except he's grander than that. Silk uh, silk outfit with the lace collar and everything. I think this kind of collar is called a Van Dyke collar as well. Uh, and he has the Van Dyke beard. Boots, probably expensive looking, with the spurs and the hyper realism of all the details. The boots back here, the horse's hair, the groom back there. This is the groom, I guess, is holding his coat. But he's gotten it off because I guess he's gotten a little warm so he's not wearing his coat. But he has somebody to hold the coat for him, adding to his status. Hat at a rakish angle. and that blackness of the hat so brings out his face, so you can see it much. If you didn't have the hat, his face, tonality of his face would sort of blend into the background. But this hat really frames his face. Look at the countenance of his eyes and his stare. And then his assistant back here is holding the horse back, and the horse is bowing to him. And of course, in this instance, if we saw the assistant standing next to him, he would probably be taller than him. And of course, the groom is a lad, so he's shorter, but he's made to look as though he's the tallest person in the picture, and he's kind of looking down at us. Like our point of view seems to be down here, and we're looking up, and he's looking down at us. All of these things, plus the lusciousness of the landscape with feathery brushstrokes everywhere, and silvery trees and branches, and sun setting and plants and everything, and all this color. It's just a gorgeous thing to look at. I'm sure the king was happy with this, because it makes him look as good as it can, but in a most artificial way. And when I think of this kind of artifice, is different from the Rubens kind of artifice. Let's look back at the Rubens for a second here. This is a king, also being made to look as good as he can look, but he's dolled up in this world of mythology, so nothing in this is attempting at all to be real. It's all storybook fantasy land in this picture. For Van Dyke here, his instructions are not to make him look like a mythological character, but look like an earthly king, who is a real person in a real landscape, who is doing the kind of thing that he would do, that is horse riding and hunting or whatever, and standing out in his lands, looking out over his domain, and having servants around him and wearing this sort of outfit. So all of those things would be real, but in order to make him look good, given that he's a short guy, he has to doll everything up in a kind of a similar kind of irreality, or something that is just as unreal as the other picture, except within the bounds of the kind of naturalism that you have with real trees and real horses and real people. But as an environment for him, but still, it's largely artificial. Another work by him of the same monarch is Van Dyck's image of Charles I in a kind of a triple portrait. Kind of odd to have a triple portrait. You see him in the profile, you see him straight on, then you see him in a three-quarter view, wearing similar sort of collars, but different and different outfits around, and different sort of hand poses and stuff. But the purpose of all this is to have this picture sent to Italy, so that Bernini could make a portrait, a marble bust of it. I think the original bust got destroyed, but I think there's a copy of something that looked like the kind of thing that Bernini would have done. I think we had a Bernini portrait of a French monarch that has a similar sort of bust with drapery and stuff flowing around it. But you can see, if you're going to make a three-dimensional sculpture of somebody that you've never seen, having a painting where you can see him from different sides is useful. And of course, he was, buddies with Van Dyke, and so it allowed him to view him and draw him and make as accurate an image of him as he could. And that kind of realism mixed with idealism is an interesting quality, because when we think of the kind of realism, say, that Caravaggio had, that realism is of the dirty and gritty people that he surrounded himself with, and he put them in his pictures because he wanted it to be real. Here is a case where Van Dyke has to do something similar, in that he's taking a real person and showing him what he really looks like, so that when the say when the marble bust comes back and they get to view it, it will look just like him, and then everyone will say, "Hey, it looks just like him." So it has to look like him. But it's also the king who's very, you can imagine kings are very, um, self-centered and very uh, um, protective of their brand, of their image, and who want to look as good as they can possibly look. So there's probably a lot of idealization in him that goes beyond what you would think of as realism. But when we come to, say, the draperies, the colors, the textures of all the things, it has all that same sort of Flemish things that you come to expect, either from any of the Flemish artists, but also from the artists who came from the tradition that was influenced by those original um, Flemish artists of the High Renaissance that we saw, like Jan van Eyck or Roger van der Weyden or any one of those. That influence went to Italy and eventually went to people like Caravaggio, who, as we saw, had photographic realism for textures and things, just like the Venetians. I'm sorry, just like the Flemish artists did. So all of that came round, and this is just an interesting thing to see, uh, because it looks as though it's three separate people all in one group, and there's no attempt at all uh, to make it diagrammatic. Like if he wanted to make a painting, and it's a nice painting, and it's a wonderful sort of composition, in addition to being something that had a practical purpose, that is, to show a sculptor how this person looked. There it is in the context of the sculpture. So the last Flemish artist that we're looking at is a female artist named Clara Peters, and she's one of the few that we have on our list. I think there will be one more in the Dutch artists category. But we had Artemisia Gentileschi from Italy, and now the Flemish artist Clara Peters. And there's not a lot known about her. They don't have a lot of records for her, how it happened to be that she became a painter. More than likely that her father was a painter and that he taught her. But they don't have records of that. And they don't have records of her belonging to the Guild of Painters. But for whatever reason, she became a painter, and what her specialty was still lifes, and she did a lot of these. Here's an example, though I think this is the one that's in your book, and it's on our list. But here's an example of another one, and here's another one. So what you're seeing is that it became a thing for artists in the Low Countries here, that there was a demand for still lives. We saw that one from Caravaggio, the basket of fruit, and that was a very, very early example. And at the time that was painted, it was very rare to have anyone make a still life picture, because there wasn't any demand for it. But at this point, in Flanders, it became a thing, and this is an early example of it. But what it was that because in the Protestant area, uh, the Protestants, one of the things that they protested about uh, about the Catholicism was all the art, and that the art was kind of like idolatry, and that they wanted to take away art from the churches, and all those images of saints and Jesus and Mary, and just have plain churches. Well, if you have a lot of plain churches, then there's a uh, people still want art, and so individuals, especially in a prosperous society like like Flanders, they merchants and people, they had enough money to buy some pictures, unlike the really wealthy who would patronize the arts for churches in Catholic countries. Um, Regular people could afford to buy pictures, and an artist would paint pictures without commissions. They would just paint them and see if they could sell them. So there would be a market of this sort of picture, and they became very popular. And this is, you know, an early example, but throughout the century, there are any number of pictures. Um, most museums you go to that have a Dutch or Flemish section, you know, are going to have these sort of pictures. It's often a table with stuff on it, usually um, ceramic or metal uh, uh, table fixtures, vases, um, pitchers, glasses, um, whatever this thing is. It's some sort of object, a container of some sort. Maybe it's a salt cellar. But in food and flowers became popular. Sometimes there are lots of Dutch pictures, for example, that are just the flowers. This one has a bowl of nuts and candies or dried fruits, and looks like a pretzel and other kinds of pretzels, just as something to be sumptuous, something to satisfy the senses and to, you know, make you want it. And some of these, in addition to being a still life, would have some connotation of uh, uh, like a moral lesson, like things are fleeting, time passes, time is fleeting, and that, you know, the vanity of you know of stuff, having lots of stuff, or the fact that it's all temporary. There was sometimes there's a, you know, a kind of a uh, imagery that you could be interpreted to mean that. But in this sort of picture, it looks like it's just something to look at and be pretty and show off the artist's ability to render all the textures and all the stuff. And it even has, like, here's an example of a pewter vessel of some kind. I guess it's a teapot. But if you look at it, it's got reflections of the artist. There's Clara there. You can see her upright here, but she's upside down here, as she would be in this concave surface. And on the convex surface, she's upright. And there, I guess this is probably her face again reflected. And the window that she's getting the light from is clearly seen there, and that window is repeated in different places. There's her face again. Reflections in the things. Some things are put there just so they can be opportunities for the artist to show off, you know, their observational prowess, uh, how things reflect, how light falls on things, all the different textures. This looks like dried plums or apricots or something, or figs. I think there may be, like, her face might be in this bit here. There's the window again reflected in the this brass object. Yeah, that's probably her face there. So it's an opportunity to show off. It's an opportunity to demonstrate, you know, the skill, but it's also um, something pretty and something decorative to have in a house. Because if you can't have religious pictures, you know, in Protestant countries, then this would be an acceptable thing to have in a person's house, to show off and show how good your taste is. Look at quick at one of the other ones. So this one I kind of think of as being a better design than the one we have in our book. This is more typical. You know, this kind of, you know, stark lighting on a thing, and just a collection, almost a random collection of objects, and not particularly composed in some way that has some interesting relationships between one another. It's just a collection of things. But this one looks more along the lines of a unified whole. With the way that the lighting works on all the pieces, you know, some things are lost in the darkness, and you know, bright bit of color here, and just nice rendering, and also nice uh, relationship of object to object. Here's there's her name on a fork, or I'm saying on a knife. That's the way she signed it on this painting. The one that we have, her name is down here, Clara P, in the year 1611. Okay, so that's Clara Peters, and that wraps up our Flemish art.